The night was serene in the rural outskirts of Hollow Creek, a quiet town surrounded by endless fields and whispering forests. The moon hung low, its silver light spilling over the rolling hills, casting long shadows that swayed gently in the breeze. Ethan Cole, a young mechanic with a knack for puzzles, had pulled over by the side of the road, his truck's hood up, steam billowing from a faulty radiator. Ethan wiped his greasy hands on his jeans, his flashlight flickering as he peered into the engine, muttering to himself. The night was still, only the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves breaking the silence. But as he tightened a bolt, a soft hum filled the air, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate within his bones. He stood up, his eyes scanning the sky, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was nothing above, just a star-studded expanse, but the hum intensified, a pressure building, making his eardrums throb. The crickets fell silent, and the wind died, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Without warning, a spotlight burst through the cloud cover, a shaft of white light enveloping Ethan. His muscles locked, his breath freezing in his throat, and the wrench slipped from his hand, hitting the gravel with a muted thud. The light seemed tangible, thick and heavy, pinning him in place. His heartbeat thundered, and his vision swam, the edges of reality blurring as if he were sinking into a dream. Above, the source of the light descended, a sleek, black vessel, its surface matte, absorbing the night around it. The ship was unlike anything earthly, its form smooth, seamless, shifting as if it were not constructed but grown. The hull rippled, metal veins pulsing with soft blue light, and as it hovered silently, the tractor beam engaged, lifting Ethan off the ground. He couldn't scream, his body paralyzed, his mind teetering on the edge of consciousness. The world below shrank, his truck, the road, the trees all becoming miniatures in a diorama, flat and unreal. The beam pulled him upward, through a hatch that sealed itself seamlessly behind him, and the darkness swallowed him whole. Ethan awoke to cold metal beneath him. His eyes fluttered open, his vision unfocused, and the world around him seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing with a rhythmic glow. He sat up, his head spinning, and his fingertips brushed the floor, which felt cool and damp, as if it were alive. The room was small, a metallic cell, the walls smooth, but constantly shifting, the surface moving like liquid mercury. As he gathered his senses, a panel across the room darkened, and figures appeared behind it. The glass-like surface revealed 3 silhouettes, their forms elongated, their movements too smooth, like shadows slipping through water. The Zylox scientists stood behind their observation screen, their large black eyes unblinking, tentacle-like appendages manipulating floating consoles covered in symbols that twisted and changed. The aliens observe him, their voices a soft murmur, translated through speakers embedded in the walls. Subject E001 shows stable vitals. One said, its voice flat, devoid of emotion. Heart rate, 72 beats per minute. Respiratory patterns normal. Cerebral activity within expected parameters for a type 3 organism. Another scientist, its tentacles coiled, leaned closer to the screen. Initiating biological scan. Prepare for tissue sampling and neural mapping. Ensure the containment field is stable. Ethan pushed himself against the wall, the surface rippling beneath his touch, as if it were breathing with him. His skin prickled, his instincts screaming, and he felt the room close in, the air thick, heavy with ozone. The lights shifted, patterns flowing, and a beam of light scanned over him, its touch cold, leaving a tingling sensation in its wake. Subject displays no anomalous traits. The third scientist concluded, its eyes narrowing. Primitive nervous system. Basic cognitive function. The species appears vulnerable, ideal for genetic analysis and behavioral conditioning. Ethan's breath quickened, his mind racing. The fear that had gripped him began to fade, replaced by a burning curiosity, a spark of defiance. He had always been good at puzzles, at seeing patterns. And as he studied the room, he realized the lights moved in rhythms, the walls pulsed with a pattern, the air hummed with a frequency that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. The Zylox continued their observations, unaware that Ethan was not a simple organism to be studied, but a variable they had not accounted for. As he closed his eyes, he began to breathe deeply, his mind clearing, his thoughts aligning with the rhythm of the ship. The room pulsed, and for a brief moment, the lights flickered, the scientists' voices cut out, and the glass screen shimmered, showing Ethan not as a prisoner, but as a shadow among shadows, his form blending with the walls, his presence slipping into the circuitry. The Zylox believed they had captured a specimen, but they were unaware that they had invited something else into their ship, a human mind, an agent of chaos, a dreamer in a world of order. And as the lights stabilized and the scientists resumed their work, a small smile touched Ethan's lips, his eyes open, but his thoughts somewhere else, moving through the ship, exploring, learning, preparing. The trap had been set, but it was not for him. It was for them. Ethan Cole sat in the center of a vast, metallic chamber, his wrists and ankles bound by translucent restraints that shimmered with an otherworldly light. The room was circular, its walls a continuous surface of liquid metal that seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with an unseen pulse. Soft blue light emanated from grooves in the floor, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with a life of their own. Above him, a cluster of alien devices hung, like mechanical vines. The machinery moved with a fluidity that defied its metallic nature, tendrils lowering delicate instruments that hovered just inches from his skin. The devices emitted a low hum, and the air around Ethan shimmered with faint static, causing the hair on his arms to stand on end. Beyond a transparent partition, the Zylox scientists watched intently. Their large, bulbous eyes never blinked, and their elongated fingers moved gracefully over floating holographic panels. Symbols in the alien language scrolled rapidly, data streams flowing with numbers and diagrams that analyzed every beat of Ethan's heart, every pattern in his brainwaves. Subject E001 shows persistent stability. One of the scientists murmured, its voice a mix of wet gurgles and synthesized clarity. Increase neural stimulus. Engage sensory manipulation protocols. A mechanical arm descended, its tip branching into a delicate lattice of needles. It hovered over Ethan's forehead, the metal tips crackling with soft blue energy. Without warning, the needles plunged into his skin, not physically but into his mind. A wave of disorientation swept over him, the room blurring at the edges as his senses were bombarded by visions. He saw flashes of memories, not his own, planets with crimson skies and seas of glass, creatures with silver exoskeletons and voices like wind chimes, entire worlds bending to the will of the Zylox, civilizations collapsing under their cold, methodical experiments. But Ethan's mind remained still, like a stone at the bottom of a turbulent river. He focused on his breathing, letting the waves of alien influence wash over him without pulling him under. His heart rate stayed steady, his pulse a calm rhythm against the invasive energy probing his consciousness. Neural resistance detected. Another scientist noted, its voice sharpening. Cerebral patterns show anomalous activity. Increase amplitude. The machinery around Ethan intensified. The hum became a growl, and the blue light shifted to harsh white. The restraints around his wrists and ankles tightened, and the room itself seemed to lean in, the walls bending towards him as if the ship itself were curious. But as the intensity rose, the Zylox technology began to stutter. The screens that had displayed perfect streams of data now flickered, the holographic symbols warping into strange, spiraling patterns. One of the screens displayed Ethan's biometric data, but the lines that should have shown his heartbeat became jagged, erratic, then smoothed out into perfect sine waves that pulsed in time with the ship's ambient hum. What is happening? The lead scientist, taller and more ornately adorned than the others, pressed a clawed hand against the control panel. The display rippled, the surface becoming less like glass and more like water. The alien symbols blinked, rearranging themselves into patterns that resembled human letters, though none of the Zylox could read them. The containment field around Ethan shimmered, the energy barrier that should have been impenetrable now fluctuating as if struggling to hold its shape. Small arcs of lightning danced along its edges, and the air filled with the scent of ozone. The machinery's hum shifted to a high-pitched whine, a sound that grated against the Zylox's senses, causing them to wince and pull back from their consoles. Ethan remained still. His breathing was deep, his eyes closed, and his expression serene. His calmness unsettled the Zylox. Their entire civilization was built on control. Control of technology, of biology, of reality itself. And yet, this human, this primitive creature, resisted them without effort, as if he existed on a different wavelength beyond their grasp. One of the scientists tapped a sequence into its panel, and the machinery shifted tactics. Probes emerged from the walls, each carrying small, luminescent orbs that pulsed with a hypnotic rhythm. The lights flashed in patterns designed to induce fear, to trigger the primal parts of the brain that governed fight or flight. Ethan's restraints tightened, the air in the chamber growing thin as the Zylox tested his physical limits. Still, Ethan did not react. His mind was elsewhere, slipping beneath the surface of his own consciousness. He could feel the ship around him, not just the walls and the metal, but the circuits, the power flowing through conduits, the pulses of data moving like blood through a mechanical body. His presence spread, touching sensors, slipping into the subtle frequencies of the containment field. For a brief moment, he felt a click, a mental latch opening. The containment field wavered, the machinery hiccuped, and for a heartbeat, the entire ship seemed to hold its breath. The Zylox scientists recoiled as their screens went dark, the holographic displays collapsing into static. One of the machines emitted a low moan, its mechanical arm twisting and sparking. The containment field around Ethan flashed with light, the barrier rippling, as if it were a thin veil of water disturbed by a stone. Systems malfunction, the lead scientist hissed, its voice layered with static. Recalibrate. Increase power. The subject must not breach containment. Ethan opened his eyes. His pupils were normal, but beneath the calm, his gaze was sharp, almost predatory. He did not strain against his bonds. He did not shout or fight. He simply sat, and, as he did, the ship around him began to respond. The walls pulsed with a different rhythm, the hum of the technology slipping slightly out of sync with itself. The lights above flickered, shadows stretching along the walls in unnatural shapes. "What is he doing?" a junior scientist whispered, but no one answered. Ethan smiled, a small, knowing expression. He felt the ship, its systems like threads in a vast web. His mind brushed against them, testing their strength, finding the points where they were weakest. He wasn't just in the chamber. He was everywhere, a whisper in the circuits, a shadow behind the screens. The Zylox had intended to map his biology, to break him down into data and patterns they could manipulate. But as their technology faltered and their reality warped, they began to realize the truth. The human mind was not a specimen to be studied. It was a storm, quiet at its center, but capable of unraveling everything around it. And as the lights dimmed, as the containment field sputtered, the Zylox stood at the edge of understanding, their fear palpable, as they became aware that they were not studying Ethan. They were his subjects now, and he was just beginning his experiment. The control room of the Zylox research vessel was a space of cold efficiency, a nexus of technology where decisions were made with calculating precision. The walls were lined with screens, displaying streams of data, biometric readouts, and sensor scans of Earth. The scientists moved with synchronized grace, their movements mechanical, their voices a murmur of commands and responses. But as Ethan Cole sat in his containment chamber, his calm mind reaching out, the sterile order of the control room began to fracture. It started subtly. A screen flickered, showing an image of a forest, its trees swaying in a gentle breeze. The lead scientist, a tall creature with silver-gray skin and clusters of black eyes, tilted its head, its tentacles pausing over the holographic controls. "What is this?" it hissed, its voice low, a guttural echo. The screen should have displayed the containment chamber, but instead, it showed Earth's wilderness, the soft glow of sunlight through leaves, the sound of birdsong faintly audible through the speakers. The image vanished, replaced by the standard data stream, and the other scientists resumed their work, dismissing it as a glitch. But then, a door opened, its mechanical hiss too loud, the lights beyond dim, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. A cold breeze drifted through, carrying the smell of pine, the freshness of rain-soaked earth, an impossibility within the hermetically sealed ship. The scientists exchanged looks, their expressions difficult to read, but their movements became hesitant. The ship's AI chimed in, its calm, synthetic voice now bearing an edge of familiarity. "System integrity stable. Initiating sequence. Ethan Cole." The name hung in the air, a human name, spoken by a machine that should have no awareness of its specimen's identity. The lead scientist's appendages twitched, and it barked a command, the lights dimming further, the screens turning black. "Isolate the containment chamber. Purge the external influence," it ordered, but its voice wavered, the calculated monotone cracking with something close to fear. As the crew moved, the environment shifted. The metallic walls seemed to sweat, beads of moisture forming on the smooth surfaces. The floor felt soft, as if the ship's hull had become soil, and when one of the scientists stepped forward, a soft squelch echoed, its foot sinking slightly, as if into mud. The screens blinked back on, but now they showed Ethan's memories, vivid images of his childhood, a bicycle on a gravel road, Christmas lights twinkling, the sound of his mother's laughter. The scientists watched, their minds struggling to comprehend. They were geneticists, engineers, masters of the material world, but this was something intangible, dreamlike, dangerous. "Impossible," a junior scientist murmured, its eyes wide, its flesh paling to a sickly gray. "We are seeing his thoughts." The AI systems began to glitch, the lights flickering, and the ship's internal speakers crackled with static, through which Ethan's voice emerged, soft and steady. "Are you enjoying the show?" he asked, his tone casual, almost friendly. "I thought you might like a taste of home." The control panel sparked, symbols morphed, becoming words in English, Earth's language, and the Zylox couldn't read them. Their own technology had become foreign, the systems slipping out of their control, as if the ship had become an extension of Ethan's mind. Doors slid open and shut, revealing corridors that looped back into the same room. Scientists ventured out, only to return, confused, their movements erratic, their voices rising as they spoke over each other, panic spreading like a virus. One screen showed a hallway, but human shadows moved across it, shadows with no bodies, their forms twisted, elongated, staring through the monitors with hollow eyes. The air turned cold, frost creeping over the metal surfaces, and breath became visible, clouding the glass panels. "Shut it down," the lead scientist screamed, but its voice came back, not through the speakers, but from the walls themselves, echoing with an edge of mockery. The lights died, and the room plunged into darkness, but in the shadows, shapes moved, the scientists' own reflections twisting into human faces, lips moving, but only Ethan's voice emerging. "You wanted to see inside my mind," he whispered, his tone gentle, almost soothing. "But now you're in here with me, and I don't think you'll find a way out." One of the scientists collapsed, its limbs folding in, eyes rolling back, as it murmured in English, the words garbled, but recognizable. Nursery rhymes, memories of a life not its own, human dreams leaking into its alien consciousness. The control room, once a beacon of order, had become a haunted house, where technology faltered, logic unraveled, and the Zylox, so sure of their superiority, found themselves lost in a maze of thoughts, trapped not by walls, but by a human mind that had turned their own ship against them. And Ethan, still in his containment chamber, his eyes closed, his breathing steady, smiled, for he knew that the true experiment had only just begun. The corridors of the Zylox research vessel were designed with cold precision. Straight lines, stark metal, and fluorescent lights that bathed the ship's interior in a sterile glow. Each hallway connected seamlessly, each door slid open with a hiss, and every step taken was measured, predictable, and controlled. But not anymore. The moment Ethan Cole's consciousness began to merge with the ship, the vessel's rigid structure started to bend, warp, and reshape itself. The Zylox scientists, once confident in their control, now found themselves in a labyrinth that defied logic. Dr. Zyron, the lead scientist, stood in what should have been the primary corridor, its walls lined with control panels and status monitors. But as it moved forward, the corridor twisted, the floor dipping, the walls curving into a spiral. The humming lights overhead began to pulse, their white glow shifting to a sickly green, then to deep crimson, casting elongated shadows that moved independently of their sources. "Containment breach," Zyron muttered, its voice trembling, a sound alien to its own ears. It touched a panel, but the surface felt soft, like flesh, warm and pulsing. The symbols on the screen swirled, rearranging into human letters, words that it could not comprehend, but that seemed to watch back. Behind it, the other Zylox scientists moved in disarray. They shuffled through the hallways, their once fluid movements now erratic, as if the ship's gravity had turned to water, thick and resisting every step. One of them, Dr. Linthar, stumbled as the floor beneath it rippled, tiles shifting like scales underfoot. It fell, but the ground rose to meet it, the metal flowing around its limbs, holding it in place. The walls began to breathe. The seams between panels opened like gills, and cool mist filled the corridor, swirling in patterns that resembled human faces, their expressions changing with each breath of vapor. "This is not possible," Linthar gasped, its eyes wide, the black orbs reflecting the distorted reality. The ship's systems, they are reacting to something external. "We must regain control." But the control room was gone. Every door they opened led to another corridor. Every turn brought them back to the same intersection, where a single light flickered, casting shadows that danced to a tune only they could hear. The ship's AI, once a soothing guide, now spoke in Ethan's voice, its words winding through the intercoms. "Left or right?" it asked, the tone playful, almost childlike. "It doesn't matter, you know. All roads lead back to me." Doors opened into empty rooms, rooms filled with mist, and rooms that seemed to be slices of Ethan's memories. One chamber replicated a diner, the red leather seats worn, a jukebox playing softly, but through the windows, only the void of space stared back. The plates on the tables held alien instruments, their blades curved, their metal stained, but they sat atop checkered cloth, as if waiting for guests. Dr. Zyron reached a junction, where the corridor split into three directions, but as it turned, the walls slid, the ceiling curved, and it found itself back where it started. It pressed a hand against its head, its thoughts slipping, memories bleeding together. "Where are we?" it asked, but its voice returned, not as its own, but as Ethan's. "We are home, Dr. Zyron," the voice whispered, and the lights dimmed, the corridors narrowing, the walls closing in. The gravity fluctuated, first light, then crushing, causing the scientists to stumble, their bodies feeling heavy, then weightless, their movements sluggish like dreams within water. One of the scientists, Dr. Velkath, tried to open a hatch, but when it pulled, the door peeled away, revealing only solid metal, a wall where there should have been an exit. The lights behind it dimmed, and shadows pooled, rising up in human shapes, their eyes white, their smiles wide, frozen in expressions of welcome. "Hello," they said in unison, and Dr. Velkath's mind fractured, its screams echoing through the ship, but muffled, as if the walls themselves absorbed the sound. The remaining crew huddled together, their alien forms trembling, their tentacles coiled tightly, as if to protect themselves. But there was no safety, only shifting walls, corridors that looped endlessly, and the ship's AI repeating a nursery rhyme in a language none of them knew. But that made tears well in their eyes, a primal fear clawing through their alien physiology. Ethan's mind had become the architecture, his thoughts the maze, and the Zylox, once the captors, were now lost in a story they could not control, characters in a dream that had no end, only new beginnings, each more twisted than the last. As the lights pulsed, the shadows moved, and the corridors sang. The ship drifted in space, its exterior unchanged, but within its hull, a new world bloomed, where Ethan Cole's imagination had woven a reality where the Zylox would wander forever, trapped not by walls, but by their own minds, unable to wake and afraid to sleep. The containment area of the Zylox research vessel had once been a sterile arena, a controlled environment where specimens were analyzed and dissected. Its walls were seamless, its floors reflective, and its air chilled to a precise temperature, ensuring that no biological contaminant could survive long enough to affect the Zylox scientists. But now, the containment area had become a theater of human emotion, a place where reality bent to Ethan Cole's will. The once metallic walls had taken on a fleshy appearance, pulsing with a steady rhythm, as if the entire chamber were the interior of a living organism. The lights, which should have been white and sterile, had dimmed to a soft amber, casting elongated shadows that moved on their own, independent of the scientists' movements. Dr. Zyron crouched against a corner, its appendages drawn tightly, the normally fluid grace of its species replaced by jerky, animalistic motions. Its black eyes, which had once reflected nothing, now held shadows within shadows, as if something stared back from the depths of its own gaze. "It is not possible," Zyron whispered, its voice fractured, a discordant echo that filled the room. "This is our ship, our technology. How could a primitive mind do this?" Across the room, Dr. Linthar sat with its back against the wall, tentacles limp, its breathing shallow. The floor beneath it had softened, a carpet of moss and grass, though the soil was cold, damp, and reeked of Earth's forests. It could hear the sound of wind through leaves, the chirping of insects, and the distant rumble of thunder, though none of these things could exist within the ship. The ship's AI had gone silent, its guiding voice replaced by muffled whispers, like a conversation through a wall. Occasionally, the voices would rise, taking on familiar tones, and Linda recognized them, not as Zylox voices, but as human. It heard its name, but not as it was known among its own kind. It was a human name, a sound that triggered emotions it did not understand: nostalgia, longing, and fear. "Come home," a voice called, soft and melodic, the intonation perfect, the accent human. "We've been waiting for you." The walls shifted, panels sliding away to reveal windows, and through them, Linthar saw a house, a small cottage with white walls, a wooden porch, and flowers blooming in carefully tended beds. A woman stood on the steps, her hand raised, her smile gentle, but her eyes hollow, empty, dark voids that sucked in light. Linthar scrambled back, its flesh scraping against the wall, which had become rough, like tree bark, splinters catching on its skin. The containment area, once a featureless cell, had transformed into a forest clearing, the floor soft with leaves, the air heavy with moisture, and roots coiling through the metal grates, as if nature itself had invaded the ship. "Zyron," it cried, its voice raw, but the lead scientist did not respond. Zyron's form slumped, its eyes closed, but through its parted lips, a human voice emerged, a child's voice, softly singing a nursery rhyme. The melody twisted, the innocence of the tune corrupted, as if the song had been dragged through darkness and memory. The other Zylox scientists, those who remained, wandered aimlessly. Some sat against walls, their expressions blank, muttering in English, reliving lives they had never lived. Others moved through doorways, only to reappear moments later, as if the ship's architecture had become a loop, a maze with no exit, where time itself had splintered. One scientist, Dr. Velkath, stood in the center of the room, its arms outstretched, as if waiting for an embrace. But the space around it was empty, save for the shadows that rippled along the walls. Shadows with human shapes, their fingers long, their eyes glinting, and their smiles too wide. "It's all wrong," Velkath whispered, and the shadows whispered back, their voices blending into a chorus that rose and fell, like waves against rock, gentle, yet unrelenting. The containment field, which should have protected the Zylox, now held them prisoner. Its energy pulsed, the field visible, a membrane of light that throbbed with Ethan's heartbeat. The scientists could see through it, but beyond the barrier, the world was a twisted mirror, reflections of Earth's landscapes, Ethan's childhood home, and faces that changed each time they looked away. The sense of time unraveled. Some scientists aged, their skin sagging, their eyes cloudy, while others reverted, their voices becoming youthful, memories slipping, until they spoke only in half-formed words, like children lost in a strange place. Ethan, still in his containment chamber, sat cross-legged, his eyes open, but his mind elsewhere. His breathing matched the ship's hum, his thoughts woven into its circuits, and as he exhaled, the walls around him sighed, the air filled with the scent of pine and rain-soaked earth. The Zylox, who had once prided themselves on their intellect, now moved as shadows, their bodies vessels for human emotions, their technology turned against them, trapped in a dreamscape of Ethan's creation. And as the containment area settled, its walls pulsing with a life of their own, the Zylox realized that they were no longer scientists, but characters in a story written by a human who had turned captivity into conquest and imprisonment into dominion. The bridge of the Zylox research vessel had once been a place of command, where decisions were made with cold efficiency and entire civilizations were judged under the icy gaze of monitors and controls. The room was circular, its walls lined with screens, holographic projections, and a central console that acted as the ship's neural core, interfacing directly with the AI. But now, the bridge was unrecognizable. The smooth metal surfaces had become mirrors, reflective panels that displayed not reality, but a fractured version of it. The screens, instead of data streams, showed Ethan's face, smiling, his expression calm, eyes unblinking. Dr. Zeron, the lead scientist, stood at the center, its appendages twitching, as if it were cold, though the air had grown warm, humid, like the breath of a living creature. The other Zylox scientists circled the walls, their movements slow, their eyes wide, as if they were sleepwalking through a nightmare. "AI system," Zyron called, its voice breaking, the words echoing back, but warped as if they had traveled through water. "Identify the current ship's status." The AI responded, but the voice was not its own. Instead, Ethan's voice filled the room, soft and steady, with a hint of amusement. "All systems functional, Commander," it said, the title twisted a mockery. "Current objective: maintain the integrity of the story. Prevent unauthorized characters from leaving." Zyron's eyes narrowed, its hands moving over the control panel, but the interface had changed. The symbols were human, the commands unresponsive, and every button pressed only shifted the environment further, walls moving, floors rippling, and doors appearing, only to vanish when approached. "Where is the specimen?" Zyron demanded, its voice rising, but the other scientists did not respond. They moved through the shadows, their forms slipping, sometimes alien, sometimes human, their eyes distant, as if they saw something else. "Right here," Ethan's voice answered, and Zyron turned, but nothing was there. Only the walls, polished to a mirror sheen, showing its own reflection, but twisted, the image wrong, with a human face superimposed over its own. "You are not real," Zyron whispered, its reflection mouthing the words back, but with Ethan's smile, teeth too white, eyes too calm. The room began to shift, the walls bending, mirrors merging, until the bridge became a corridor, then a cell, then a forest clearing where the floor was grass and the ceiling the night sky, though the stars moved, forming shapes that stared down like watchful eyes. The other Zylox scientists wandered into view, but their bodies had changed. Some had taken human forms, their movements stiff as if puppeteered. Others had become shadows, their edges frayed, their footsteps silent, passing through walls, blending with the darkness. Zyron stepped back, its foot sinking into the ground, which felt soft like sand, grains slipping over its claws, pulling it down. The more it struggled, the faster it sank, until the ground closed over its knees, then its waist, and finally its chest, leaving only its face exposed, surrounded by a sea of shifting soil. "You took me, thinking I was your subject," Ethan said, and this time he appeared, his form solid, standing at the edge of the pit. His features were human, but they shifted, eyes turning black, skin becoming shadow, until he was both there and not there, a projection of thought, a manifestation of will. "But this is my story now," he continued, his voice layered, the AI systems mimicking him, screens flashing with memories of Ethan's life, earthly landscapes, and faces of people the Zylox had never known, but whose names whispered in their minds. The containment fields, which had once been used to hold specimens, activated, but now they enclosed the Zylox themselves. Energy barriers hummed to life, the lights soft, but unbreakable, casting a warm glow, like sunlight through leaves, but the walls beyond displayed only infinite space, an endless reflection of the Zylox's own terror. "You can't do this," Zyron gasped, its breath ragged, its mind slipping as the environment twisted, memories of its own life unraveling, human images mixing with alien reality, until it could no longer tell which was truth and which was dream. Ethan crouched, his eyes level with Zyron, his form casting no shadow, though the light fell directly upon him. "You built this ship," he said, his voice soft, gentle, like a parent to a child. "But you never considered what might happen if someone else took the wheel." The ship shuddered, the AI core pulsed, and the systems realigned, showing Ethan's name as the registered captain, the Zylox crew listed as specimens under observation. "You are part of the story now," Ethan said, and as the walls closed in, the floor solidified, and the mirrors darkened, the bridge of the ship became a cell, an infinite maze, where the Zylox would walk forever, seeing only what Ethan wished them to see, feeling only the emotions he allowed. And as the ship drifted through the void, its exterior unchanged, its interior became a world of stories, where reality bent, and the Zylox became characters trapped within a human mind, in a dream that had no end, only deeper layers, each more twisted than the last. The morning sun rose gently over the rolling fields of Hollow Creek, the dew shimmering on blades of grass, as if the earth itself were waking from a peaceful dream. The air was cool, crisp, filled with the sound of birdsong and the soft rustle of leaves. The world seemed normal, untouched by the nightmare that had unfolded beyond the skyline. A hatch hissed open, a seam in reality, as if the air itself had parted, and Ethan Cole stepped out of nothingness. He wore the same clothes he had on the night of his abduction, a faded jacket, worn jeans, and mud-caked boots. His hair was tousled, but his eyes clear, a soft smile on his lips, as if he had just woken up from a pleasant nap. Behind him, the Zylox ship remained, but not in the traditional sense. It sat like a shadow at the edge of perception, a haze that blended with the sky, metal and glass interweaving with the clouds. Its hull shifted, transparent, like a mirage that refused to solidify. Through its viewport, the Zylox scientists stared, their faces pressed against the glass, eyes wide, but their expressions empty. Dr. Zyron, once a figure of authority, now seemed diminished, its skin pale, its tentacles limp, as if the ship itself had drained the life from it. The other Zylox scientists stood behind it, their movements slow, their bodies translucent like ghosts in a house that had been abandoned. They could see Ethan, but Ethan did not see them. To him, they were shadows, whispers, echoes of a dream he had left behind. He took a deep breath, the air filling his lungs, the warmth of the sun brushing over his skin, and he smiled, a genuine expression, as if the world had welcomed him back. The ship hummed, a low sound, more a vibration felt through the earth than a noise. Its lights pulsed, but faintly, as if dying embers were trying to hold on, but the glow faded, and with it, the presence of the ship dimmed. Ethan began to walk, his steps unhurried, his boots pressing softly into the wet grass. As he moved, the ship behind him shimmered, its outline bending, the metal warping, until it became part of the horizon, a distortion in the light, like heat rising from pavement, always there, but never seen. Inside, the Zylox scientists wandered, but the rooms had become endless, the corridors loops, the doors opening only to lead them back to where they started. The containment chambers had turned into prisons, but the cells were not physical. They were constructs of the mind, memories reshaped, dreams given form. They walked through fields, but the sky was wrong. They sat in rooms, but the walls shifted, showing earthly landscapes, human faces, and voices they could not escape. Some had already succumbed, their forms still, their minds broken, while others clung to routines, pressing buttons that no longer responded, issuing commands to a ship that had become deaf to their voices. For the Zylox, time unraveled. They would never age, but never truly live. They were stuck in a moment, a story they could not rewrite, characters in a tale where Ethan Cole had become the author, his will shaping their reality, his dreams their world. As Ethan reached the edge of the field, a car drove by, its driver a local farmer, who gave him a friendly wave, not noticing the way Ethan had appeared as if from thin air. Ethan waved back, his smile warm, his expression calm, and as he walked onto the road, his form solid, his shadow sharp, he blended into the world seamlessly. The Zylox ship, now a ghost in the blue sky, drifted into a cloud, its form dissolving, and soon it was gone, a ripple in reality, a myth waiting to be born, a story for another time, if anyone ever noticed it again. Ethan continued walking, the world wide open before him, and as he moved, he hummed softly, a tune from his childhood, his steps light, his presence real, but his mind still a doorway, where worlds shifted and dreams became truth. And as the sun rose higher, the field lay quiet, the birds sang, and the earth turned, holding its secrets close, while the Zylox remained, lost in shadows, trapped not by walls, but by their own perception, in a prison that had no bars, only the endless corridors of the mind. Ethan was free, but the Zylox, for all their technology and power, would forever be the ones who had ended up trapped.